they reckon actually to take that ground would take 4 years and 2 million more casualties. So what we've sort of seen around Pokrovsk and Kupiansk would sort of back that up. And maybe this is designed by the Ukrainians to have all this focus on this particular area, because it is absolutely, as you say, just chewing up Russian soldiers at an, you would have thought, an unsustainable rate.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. Now, today on day 1351 of Vladimir Putin's 10-day special military operation or full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we're very privileged to be talking once again to Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. Now, Hamish, Director of Doctors Under Fire, former British Army Colonel, expert in CBRN. We might touch on something nuclear and biosecurity. And of course, your book, Chemical Warrior, is one that I'd encourage anyone, as we're coming up to Christmas. It's a fantastic stocking filler for people to read. And you're an old friend of Frontline. Hamish, welcome back.
Well, thanks very much for having me on, Phil, and highlighting my book. And my next one on tanks is due out in a few months' time.
Well, we'll advertise that as well whenever it comes out, and I look forward to reading it. But Ukraine's interesting at the minute. There's a lot going on, but there's not being a lot reported really in the press. And if we started, we'll start at the tactical level and look at what's going on. There's a lot of reports coming out that Pokrovsk is just about to fall. Now, a lot of it's coming out of Russian channels, and therefore it could be the fact that they're deliberately misreporting this to try and have an effect, or genuinely, because of the pressure that there's been for 18 months, it is in its last legs. What do you think?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Philip. Things are pretty opaque at the tactical level at the very front line. And as you say, Pokrovsk has been the focus of all the sort of close haul fighting. We understand 170,000 Russians were put into the area to try and attack. Of course, although we're talking about a tactical battle, it does have a strategic impact. If the Russians could break through there in Kupiansk, they are through that great defense, or a long way through that great defensive line. And then, there's not a heck of a lot between that and Kyiv. So it is a tactical battle of strategic importance. As you say, most of the noise on social media at the moment is coming out of Russian channels. Which is, very, very little of that is stuff that you can take as being the absolute truth. I think it is pretty clear that the Russians have made some ground, and the fact that General Budanov, the head of the Ukraine security services, was reportedly over there at the weekend to direct some particular operations. So the Ukrainians, I think, absolutely realise the importance and are doing some counter attacks, counter strokes, whatever you like, using some of their very, very best units. And that seems to be holding. We're hearing a lot of stories about infiltration by Russians in civilian clothes. This sort of clandestine type activity is really hugely challenging. It's difficult enough on the modern battlefield anyway, working out who your enemy is. But then when you're in civilian clothes, which we would throw the Geneva Convention at them and the European Court of Human Rights and all the rest of it. As we both know, quite frankly, on the front line in somewhere like Ukraine, that means very, very little. So the Russians do appear to be making some ground, but at tremendous casualties. I've just been updated on the casualty rate, which the UK government think about, and they believe Russia has lost 350,000 casualties this year so far, and they are currently losing over 1,008 a day, which is absolutely massive. Equally, apparently, the Russians are slightly further to the north and east in Kupiansk are trying to make gains, but the Ukrainians are just about holding. And I understand Ukraine's also doing some small counterattacks in Kursk, which is sort of fixing the troops further north than there. But, as you suggested, not a lot's happening. A lot of people are being killed, a lot of Russians in particular. And the Russians, as we've discussed before, keep throwing men into the meat grinder to try and grumble through, because we are, dare I say it, that Afghan vets like you and I, Philip, talk about the fighting season. And in this part of the world, the fighting season is sort of coming to an end as the weather closes in, and people are trying to get the best position. But ultimately, not a lot has shifted in the last few months and weeks, and the position is a little bit opaque.
But you've touched on a few things there. The huge Russian casualties that there are, and the fact that there's misreporting and the front line isn't really moving that much. But do you think if the Ukrainians do have to give up Pokrovsk, everyone talks about it as being a strategically important town. It isn't a city; it's a little town, and it's effectively been using U.S. parlance that I've heard before, rubbleized. There's nothing left, and it was described as strategically important because it was a logistic hub, with a rail link and road links, but those will have been rubbleized as well as everything else. And the Ukrainians will have almost certainly prepared further defensive positions that they can fall back to. And if they can hold the Russians up again for another 18 months, surely, given the disparity in size between the Ukrainian military and the Russian military, this is actually a military success, given the casualties that they're inflicting on the Russians, holding them for a period of time, whilst they then continue to attack at the operational level Russia's ability to continue to fund its conflict, attacking the oil refineries and everything else, which is a long, slow process of trying to grind Russia down. Do you think that's a fair description of what Ukraine could be doing?
Yeah, absolutely, Philip. You make really good points there, and I think Petros was a strategically important town, maybe a few months ago, but now now it's not strategically important anymore. As you say, they will have folded back, the lines will have gone back, and they will have thickened the great defensive line sort of behind and to the north and to the west of that. And I think you make a very good point about soaking up Russian casualties. The UK's MOD intelligence update, I think 2 weeks ago, we're talking about when Trump and Putin were suggesting that Ukraine should give up the whole of the Donbass and then they'd have a peace deal. But when the algorithms were looked at and the scientists at Portland and all the rest sort of put it into their computers, they reckon actually to take that ground would take 4 years and 2 million more casualties. So what we've sort of seen around Petros and Kupiansk would sort of back that up. And maybe this is designed by the Ukrainians to have all this focus on this particular area, because it is absolutely, as you say, just chewing up Russian soldiers at an, you would have thought, an unsustainable rate. And it sort of also highlights, the other issues Russia's got. It's throwing untrained men into this battle, and that is criminal, really. Because they have no chance of surviving. There are no doubt a few Russian special forces in there who are perhaps the focus of some of the videos we see on the internet of raising a Russian flag somewhere, but that's not the rank and file. So yeah, I think really what we've all said, this is grinding on and on and on. And as you say, as the tactical battle is just a wash of blood and guts, the sort of operational and strategic battle, perhaps we better look at that to see who is making progress there. And you would have to say at the moment, actually, Ukraine probably has a slightly upper hand.
Russia's standard tactic whenever things aren't going quite right for them is they seem to come out and wave or rattle the nuclear saber. And over the last week or 10 days or so, we've seen 2 nuclear sabers being rattled with the Bereznik or Skyfall nuclear-powered cruise missile. I must admit, having studied nuclear science at university, I had to go away and check the concepts behind it and all the rest of it and go, is this real? And then, of course, the Poseidon, as the Russians describe it, doomsday nuclear torpedo. What's your assessment? You're a nuclear expert, having commanded the CBRN battalion for the British military and then advised from a staff perspective on all matters up to Minister of Defence and higher for many years. What's your assessment of these Russian capabilities, and are they adding anything really that we should be concerned about?
Well, I don't. I really don't think they are, and I wrote quite extensively in the other popular broadsheet in this country in some detail. I think first of all, the whole nuclear bang drumming by Russia really coincided with the Tomahawk missile issue. And when you saw the flat spin the Kremlin got into, and all Putin's little uh, hound dogs like Peskov and Medvedev, when there was when at one stage people thought that Trump was going to give a couple of hundred cruise missiles to the Ukrainians. So I think that really started all this off. If we look at the Skyfall missile, this nuclear powered missile, as you've described, to me it's a complete chimera. So I recommend listeners, if you want to know more about this, read the book Nuclear War by Annie Jacobson, which was published a few months ago. It's a really easy read in what is a really difficult subject, but it's sort of it goes through the scenario of really Armageddon. And the first thing that you learn from reading this is that everything is over in 60 minutes because of the scenario of deterrence, and once you're attacked, you attack back again, and the fact that we now have people like North Korea and others who have these weapons. So looking at Skyfall, the Russians say it's great because it can loiter for hours and hours and hours. It has a key weakness. It only flies at 500 miles an hour. We were discussing a couple of weeks ago, the Russians were vaunting their hypersonic missiles as being the only sort of missile you want, which can fly at Mach 3 or 4 or 5,000 miles an hour. So suddenly, no, you want something that goes at snail's pace. And my point being is that if there is a nuclear exchange, it's all over hours and hours before these missiles get anywhere near the US. And if it's they front it up as a cruise missile, if it's a conventional cruise missile, fair enough. But how much does it cost? We're talking a Tomahawk is under $1 million a copy at the moment. This sort of thing, I mean, the engine alone, the nuclear reactor and engine alone is going to cost you, $10 to $20 million before you even think about the warhead. So to me, that what one forgets it. The Poseidon, whatever they want to call it, maritime UAV, underwater submarine that blows up to create a tsunami. It seems a very strange way of going about doing business. When we saw in the nuclear deterrence, that whole scenario, the ICBMs in submarines seem to be intercontinental ballistic missiles with multiple warheads, megatons worth of power. And it was interesting also last week, when all this was going on, Trump reminded Putin that I've got my super submarine parked just off the coast of Russia with enough nuclear power to obliterate St. Petersburg and Moscow. So, yeah. And again, also, I think on the same flight on Air Force One, he told Los Alamos and the rest of the nuclear program to start testing again, which, for you and me, they've not tested their nuclear capability for 30 years. I find that a little bit strange. I'm sure they've certainly tested the delivery means. Whether they've actually tested any sort of nuclear action, who knows? So I think and hope this is just part. Dare I call it banter, nuclear banter? That is probably what it is. The Russians got really flustered by Tomahawks. They've come up with this nuclear piece, which we've discussed for the last 3.5 years, virtually every month, about the threats of nuclear attack, and nothing has happened. So I think that is all it is. I know you just mentioned the N word, mentioned the nuclear word, and everybody starts flapping and getting very sort of hot under the collar. But actually, to me, the fact these things have stayed in their packets for the last 85 years is what should reassure people. So it's a diversion, I think, from what's really happening on the front lines and in Ukraine and Russia.
Skyfall is nuclear powered, just for the listeners out there, from an intelligence perspective, to get the weight right to put it on an aircraft, you're going to have to reduce the amount of shielding that there is in the nuclear reactor. Otherwise, we'll get too heavy. And therefore, it's going to be a big beacon that is flashing that the satellites in space will be able to track instantly as it flies around. And of course, if you've got the shielding reduced, then it's going to contaminate the air that it's heating up with radiological material and ionize it, and it's going to have therefore a big trail that you can follow, a big red arrow in the sky saying here I am the whole way through. And then of course, if you put a conventional warhead on it, you've just created a dirty bomb, and that's probably going to cause more problems than a nuclear warhead, and therefore everyone will have to assume it's got a nuclear warhead on it. And boy, watch the first response going out from other nations very quickly indeed. So no, I agree with you completely. But Trump talked about the US restarting its nuclear testing on the back of what Russia's doing here. But he also hinted that Russia was testing, and he then hinted that China was testing, and he sort of suggested that these things are happening very deep underground and we don't always know about it. Do you think he's suggesting that both Russia and China are testing warheads that we don't know about? And do you think this is something that we should actually be worried about?
Well, I think we should certainly be worried about proliferation. It is pretty clear now that the North Koreans do have a nuclear capability. In other words, a warhead and a missile that could be fired. I think coming out of the White House or out of the Pentagon rather recently, and Trump alluded to it, the Chinese are building nuclear capability faster than anybody else, and are expected to have up to 1,000 warheads by the end of this decade, by 2029, 2030. Now that is a huge increase. They're thought to have about 300 or 400 warheads at the moment, so that is a doubling. It's clear that that Russia is absolutely reliant on its nuclear capability. Whether they are testing, who knows? I mean, the part when we look at the Skyfall missile, the first time we knew about it was in 2017. So that is 8-9 years ago, and it's taken that long to get to a position to test it. So again, I think there are lots of smoke and mirror. Most people, I think certainly the Americans, have focused more on China and the worry about that and what that's happening there. And I think it was very interesting last week. I wouldn't say Trump was cozying up to the Chinese president, but they certainly were having close meetings, which probably really hacked off Putin and the Kremlin, who sort of thought the Chinese were their buddies, but actually one could get the feeling that President Xi actually realizes that he needs to be closer to America than Russia. So whether testing's going on, I mean, if you look at it purely as military experts like we are, Philip, you would assume that they will be testing it. It's no good having a capability that you're not convinced is going to work, and more importantly, if your opponent doesn't think it's going to work, because then it's not a deterrent. So the sniff that the testing's going on is, again, I think it's part of this sort of disinformation and propaganda that you and I have got used to. So whether they are or not is probably not even the point. The fact we're talking about it probably is the point.
Yeah, no, it's the information war is something that people tend to forget. But coming back then into Ukraine and looking at the sort of the broader geopolitical military situation, there's a new U.S. ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, and he's gone into Kyiv. And he's been focusing on the winter air defense capabilities for Ukraine, but also delivered a message about achieving peace led by President Trump's efforts. Do you think actually President Trump has got a plan for peace? Is it just hopeful in what's going on? Is Putin playing him? Where do you think we are on this? I will have the war stopped in 24 hours, as he said before he got inaugurated.
It's so difficult to call, isn't it? I mean, Trump says one thing one day and another thing the next day. I think the fact that he and certainly his people are still very engaged, is a good thing. I think Trump is really getting hacked off with Putin. I mean, some of his outbursts earlier on in the week, or at the end of last week, rather, that Putin was just not, had no interest in peace, wasn't coming to the peace table. We saw the sanctions on the Russian oil companies and other sanctions as well, really turning the screw, which Trump hasn't wanted to do for some time. A lot of us are sort of thinking, why on earth don't you turn off the Russian oil? But Trump has managed to get the Indians to stop buying oil from the Russians at the moment, and the Chinese. So he's putting quite a lot of effort into it. We are coming into this winter period. As you say, air defense is absolutely key. We know the Germans apparently have given Kyiv a whole bunch of Patriot missiles, and Patriot is very important because we know Patriot knocks out the Russia unbeatable hypersonic missiles with regularity, and actually it looks at the moment that Russia is really focusing on the power infrastructure in Ukraine to try and turn the lights out and the heat off this winter. It has done for a while. So all the air defense to try and prevent that is required. The Ukrainians seem to be doing quite a good job of repairing that stuff at the moment, which is good. Conversely, the Ukrainians are stepping up even more their attacks on Russian oil infrastructure, which is having a significant impact. And it seems to be more successful than the Russians either way. But going back to your question, is peace looking likely at the moment? No, absolutely not. I think Putin is almost in a very narrow tunnel that he can't turn around in, and he knows that for his own survival and his own achievements, he's not in a place where he can sue for peace because he's so far away from getting what he told everybody that he would get. Whether Trump is minded to really force his hand, it doesn't seem so at the moment. I mean, we do talk about the battle-winning Tomahawk missiles. Whether they are or not, who knows? Psychologically, they probably are, and we know in warfare, psychology is 10 as to 1. Interesting, the UK announced, I think yesterday, a whole lot more Storm Shadow missiles. We don't know how many are going. Probably not a huge amount, but they are effective. But they're not a couple of hundred cruise missiles. So at the moment, it sort of looks that come the spring, we might not be too far away from where we are at the moment.
But on a tactical level, I don't think there's going to be much change because, as you say, we're coming into the end of the fighting season as the Ukrainian mud stops anything from happening. But do you therefore see that there will be an increase in these strategic or operational level attacks with Ukraine attacking Russia's oil infrastructure, but its defense manufacturing capabilities, and more special operations executive type attacks throughout Russia to try and panic the command structure? And the Russians, of course, will respond by attacking civilian targets and energy infrastructure across Ukraine.
Yeah, no, I think your assessment is absolutely spot on there, Philip. And it was in last winter where Ukraine's special operations, really stepped up, taking out some key generals in Moscow and elsewhere, and other strategic strikes that they tend to do in the winter. So one anticipates that. I mean, there was only a story today about Ukrainian special operations attack onto an oil rig just off Crimea, which apparently was a base for Russian special forces. Again, all slightly opaque, but it would appear that the Ukrainian special forces, the SBU, that have done such a good job are very, very active and keep going. And their boss Bodanov seems to be, quite a exceptional leader. So one would anticipate those stepping up and also Russians stepping up at attacks, which is why hopefully it's a positive sign that the new US NATO ambassador is in Kyiv, hopefully making sure that Ukraine's got as much air defense as it can possibly have to make sure that it can protect its vital infrastructure and its key civilian targets that Putin seems to attack with regularity.
Okay, so as a final question now, look at the whole picture from where we are and what's happened over the last number of years as we get into 2026. What do you think one thing, whether it be a weapon system, a political decision, a tactical change that you believe would be most critical for Ukraine to survive the winter and you either gain the initiative, maintain the initiative, or develop the initiative further to keep its fighting viability in through 2026?
I mean, I think that is a hell of a question, and we could discuss this probably for the rest of the day. I think if we look at this time last year, what's the difference? Well, I think the difference is that NATO countries are now, on their game, as it were. They are now rearming. They are being much more on the front foot. Especially the Baltic states. I mean, and most especially the Germans. 200 billion on defence, growing an army to 250,000 in pretty short order. So I think, again, psychologically, that is a really major step. Putin, well, maybe not last year, but when he started this whole thing, he thought we were disinterested and wouldn't get involved. Well, that is a very, very different picture now. So there is a much harder shoulder to each side of Ukraine and behind it. And that must be reassuring to the Ukrainians. I think there could be, Russia could slip up. If we just need a couple of Russian jets shot down over Estonia or Lithuania or something, or even Poland, that could really, tip the balance here. So I think, if you put yourself in the enemy, that you must do, if you're sat in the Kremlin, you're thinking, you don't want to do anything that is really going to hack Trump off and, enable Ukraine to get some special.
Putin's good at hacking Trump off, it seems, at the moment. So we have to see where that goes. But, Hamish, I think time is against us. It's been a real privilege talking to you again on Times Radio Frontline.
Thanks for having me, Philip.
You've been watching Frontline with me, Philip Ingram. If you'd like access to exclusive content, please subscribe to Times Radio membership and watch us on YouTube. But you can now get us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. And don't forget, you can also listen to Times Radio for the latest updates on global affairs and read about them at thetimes.com. Thank you.